So Barry used to work with the Alberta government as a nutritionist with Alberta Ag, and he's actually started his own company now, Yaremcio Ag Solutions, I believe it is. And his wife is no stranger to 4-H as well. She used to be a regional specialist with 4-H Alberta. So saying that, take it away, Barry. Thank you for being here tonight as well.
All right, thank you very much. Trying to get my screen to come up here now. Okay. Tracy, you might need to share the screen.
You have to share. There you go, Barry.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, got to get myself set up here. All right. Sorry. Get rid of that. Try this. There we are. Is that full screen? Everything looks good?
Yeah, everything looks great, Barry.
Okay, so in some of the previous webinars that I've done, we've talked about how to get calves on feed, adjusting feed intake or what you're feeding so that you can go ahead and get the replacement heifer or the cow-calf project or the steer project to the proper weight by the time the show or show and sale actually happens. But we're going to take a little bit of a different approach here this evening. They asked me to talk a little bit more about the mechanics of feeding cattle and also with the different feeds that are available and how they impact the nutrition program of the animal. So we're going to touch on ionophores, what they are, what do they do and how they work. One of the other problems that happens with weather like we have today with the melting snow and the mud and the muck in the pens, there's a chance of getting coccidiosis. How do we control some of the parasites and what products are available? And looking at how do we compare feed ingredients and different commercial products. There's a process that needs to be gone through, and we'll go through that. Whole versus rolled grains, what minerals to use, and telling when an animal is finished. So into the ionophores, what they do is they improve digestive efficiency by 5 to 7% in most diets. They help maintain a constant rumen function, especially when you're either in a situation with high legume forages or on a high finishing grain ration. They can help prevent the problems with acidosis and bloat and grain overload. The nice thing with Bovetec, one of the three ionophores, is it can be fed free choice, whereas Romancin must be in a controlled environment. If cattle eat too much Bovetec, there is no disruption of their feed intake, whereas with Romancin you can see a fairly large reduction in feed intake, and it can take up to 2 weeks before everything is back to normal, and then you can start reintroducing more grain into the ration. Economically, with the improvement in feed efficiency, you're getting about $4 improvement in gain or utilization for every dollar invested. And the nice thing is both products can be put into supplements and pellets, so you don't want to mix it on farm. And in fact, the new regulations state that a lot of these medications cannot be mixed on farm anymore, and it must come in a complete product or a complete supplement. Now, Romancin is the one that is the most common. The way it works is it reduces the gram-positive bacteria, and what that does is it allows the gram-negatives to digest more of the fiber and make more propionic acid or propionate which is the key ingredient when you try to improve digestive efficiency and use of energy in the Krebs cycle. So Romancin can be fed at 22 milligrams per kg for cocci prevention. In my opinion, that is a good way to do it if you're feeding a low-risk situation. But if your cows are a little bit on the thin side or you want to put a little bit more weight on them, I typically recommend the 33 milligrams per kg for feed efficiency and cocci prevention. Now, there's a new registration out at 48 milligrams per kg for feedlots. And what I've learned is that rate was approved in the United States first. And the reason they did that was they were having real problems with cocci prevention down there. And they found that the 48 did a good job on the cocci, but did not have a big impact on feed efficiency. Romancin is better for grain bloat prevention. Now, when we look at the next product, which is Bovetec or Lice sodium, it also alters rumen bacteria population, and the gram-positives tend to drop in population numbers, but there's only one rate for this product to be supplied in a ration, and that's at 36 milligrams per kg for growing animals. The one thing that Bovetec does have a claim for as well is it helps reduce methane production. And that's partly why you have a better feed efficiency. If they're not belching out the methane, those extra hydrogens can be used in the Krebs cycle to produce more energy for growth and animal performance. It does it, feed intake is reduced by weight gain, and the important thing there is it's not like you're not having to feed them at free choice or full amounts that they have a little bit of feed left in the bunk, because the last thing you want to do is have them shorted on feed, and that will do a bigger job of reducing feed efficiency and gains rather than having that little bit extra in the bunk at the end of the day. The Lice sodium or Bovetec is more effective to prevent legume bloat and very, very effective at what it does. The cost on Bovetec is about 2 cents a day higher than Romancin for a finishing calf. Now, Posistack, one that's not talked about very much, is also a product that will improve feed efficiency. But the other thing that this product has over the others is if you're running heifers in a feedlot, when you combine it with MGA or malagesterol acetate, it helps suppress estrus in the pen. And if they're not cycling, they eat more, they gain more weight. But unfortunately, the company that manufactured Posistack has been bought out, and the new owner of the company is not actively promoting this product anymore. The one thing that it is not strong on is it's not effective for cocci prevention. That's why your Bovetec is probably your better choice. So when we looked at, I've been mentioning coccidiosis all the way through so far, but what is coccidiosis? It's a protozoa, which is almost like a virus, that infects the intestine of the animal. It's both the small and large intestines. And what it does is it causes irritations on the wall of the intestine. And it can cause scours. And if there's enough damage in the rumen wall, or the intestinal wall, excuse me, the bloody scours can occur. Now, how does this problem occur? We can have cows that appear perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with their manure. There's nothing wrong. They're eating well. But they can be carriers of these protozoa. And every so often, there'll be a batch of these eggs or oocytes that are excreted in the manure. And when they do that, these eggs are either shed onto the grass, or onto the ground or into the slop water that's present in the pens right now when the snow is melting. And the calves either lick the dirt, try to graze some of the short grass, or they're drinking water out of those small ponds. So that's how the cycle occurs. You can get coccidiosis in cows, but it's most common in calves up to 8-9 months of age. And there's 3 different variety or pathogenic species of this, and I'll let you guys pronounce those on your own. So what happens is when you start off, you've got a calf that is out in the environment and he's ingesting the feeder water, and it's got one of these eggs in it. Those eggs go into the digestive system and eventually infect the small and large intestine towards the back end of the digestive system. When the load of eggs gets too large, then that calf, in effect, goes ahead and sheds some more of the eggs and just contaminates the new ground that they're on or in the areas that they're grazing on or the pens that they're in. So the big thing is you want to prevent these eggs from being eaten and shed by the calves. So how does it hurt the intestines to cause the bloody scours? So in the small intestine, you've got a bunch of fingers inside the lining of the intestine, and the villi, or the finger-like projections off of these extensions, are what absorb the nutrients. So when the bacteria infect these villi or these finger-type projections off of these protrusions, what it does is it causes damage to the gut lining. It actually makes holes in there and eats away at the gut lining. If the walls start to recover and repair itself, you can have the eggs captured within the rumen wall. And eventually, when those walls deteriorate again, or these eggs get more aggressive in their growth and need more space, they'll destroy the wall and they get exposed, and then they're excreted down the digestive system and out the back end of the cow. So it usually takes about 3 weeks for the 2 main varieties of cocci that we have here in North America to actually start shedding and show the signs of the disease with the bloody scours. But unfortunately, there's no vaccines available prevention. And the only thing you can do is not overgraze the pasture, keep the bedding pack dry, try to drain all the water or do a little bit of landscaping in the pens when they're not being used so that that water automatically drains out of it. You need to feed Romancin or Bovetec a minimum of 21 days prior to the anticipated infection, or some people say I want to start feeding about 6 weeks before calving just to be sure. So it can be done. These are preventative measures only, and the treatment product that is available if a coccidiosis outbreak occurs is called decox. And in order to get instructions on how to feed and what to feed and for how long, you have to talk to your veterinarian because it is a drug. I'm not a veterinarian, so I can't prescribe anything or give instructions on how to use some of these products. Bovetec and Romancin are considered a feed additive, so I can give you rates for them, but I can't give you rates for the decox. The other side that occurs with raising animals is you always have the chance of an animal picking up a different type of parasite. There's a number of them, but the ones that I'm looking at more are the internal parasites, which are the liver fluke, the lungworm, and then you've got the external parasites, the lice. You can have biting or sucking lice, horn flies, and mange mites. Lice and the other parasites can build up a tolerance to the products that are being used. So no different than when you're spraying a crop of barley or wheat. You don't want to use the same family or same group of products every time, because you will get resistance, like wild oats or chickweed will get resistance to the herbicide, and you have to change so that you can control it. Same thing occurs with cattle. So the product of choice for a lot of people are the mectins, such as Ivomec or Cydectin. There's a number of different products on the market right now, but they all use the same family, the mectin family, to get control of lice and the internal parasites in the fall when they're being treated. Now, this year is a perfect example where I've been seeing a lot of cattle with lice so far. And what the producers need to do there is change from a mectin type product to a different family, which are called synthetic pyrethroids, and use a product such as Boss for the second treatment. And that usually occurs right about now, or maybe even a little bit earlier. Now, the one thing you have to be careful with is lice are an opportunist. If they can feel heat or smell carbon dioxide from you and you're very close to the cow, they will jump off the cow and land on your clothes or in your hair, and you can become infected as well. So you've got to be really careful when you're handling cattle that have lice. Don't get too close to them. Be sure that you change all your clothes before you get into the house, because you don't want lice in the house. And also make sure you take a very hot shower with lots of soap. And if nothing else, have one of your parents look through your hair to make sure you don't have, in a few days, to make sure that you don't have any nits in your head when the lice lay eggs in your hair. Now, to control some of these parasites, you've got to know if they're internal or external. So the lungworms are a type of external or internal parasite, and lice, the chewing and the sucking lice, are two examples, are external lice. Now, the treatment recommendations, again, must come from a veterinarian, or if you feel comfortable enough, read the label and follow the instructions that are on the bottle. So the mectins and synthetic pyrethroids we've talked about already. Now, if you're looking at controlling the lungworms, stomach, and intestinal worms, you need to use a different family called fenbendazole or Safeguard. And the treatment for that occurs between 1 and 6 days. There's instructions that you can follow for that. Now, when you're comparing different types of homegrown feed, you've got the silages, you've got the hays, you've got the straw, and there's a whole bunch of difference between what you're actually feeding and how you supplement. So for example, if you're using a straight alfalfa hay, like they typically do in the dairy, you have more than 18% protein, high levels of calcium, and good levels of phosphorus. But as you go down the list, you can see that the protein levels are going down. Calcium and phosphorus levels are going down for some of them as well. And that's due to the fact that it's not a straight alfalfa, there's grass in it. The other compounding factor is, as the hay becomes more mature and the silages get more mature, your protein levels drop by between 1 and 1.5% per week. And your phosphorus levels also generally drop with time as well. Calcium will drop by the time the plant is setting or has the extension and the seed head is showing, or if the blossoms are showing on the alfalfas, the phosphorus levels will be going down at that point in time. So the poor quality feeds, the slough hay, the barley straw, and the pea straw, you can see that the protein levels get down quite significantly. Wheat straw is even below that for protein, but typically you've got a low calcium and low phosphorus, low energy feed. Pea straw is a little bit different than the cereal straws. It is a legume plant, no different than the alfalfa, so you can expect the calcium levels to be higher than in the cereal straws. Energy values between the different straws is almost identical. So I mentioned a bunch of numbers that were, 16, 14, 10% for either silages or hays. And those numbers were all on a dry matter basis, meaning the moisture has been removed. But the silages or any feed that you get on a feed test report has both an as-fed or a dry matter column giving you nutrient values. Always work off of the dry matter content so that you can compare apples against apples. So if you've got a silage and a hay and a straw with different protein levels in this example, what you would do is, for example, the pit silage, you divide the protein by the percentage of dry matter. So in this case, with the silage, 100% moisture minus 65, or 100% total weight, you take off 65% moisture, giving you 35% dry matter. Then you take the as-fed protein content, divide it by the percentage of dry matter, or 0.35, to give you a 10.85 protein content. So that way you can compare the alfalfa hay and the pea straw on an equal basis so that you're getting a true picture of what's going on. One of the things that does happen and needs to happen when you're feeding grain to cattle, if you've got small animals under 700 pounds, they take a long time to eat. They can chew their grain effectively, and there's no need to grind or roll cereal grains or even peas to be that matter. Now, once they get over 700 pounds, they gulp the food, no different than the cows, and you're going to lose digestive efficiency. So at that point, you need to process the grain either through a roller mill or through a hammer mill. Now, the grain coming out of the processor, be it a roller mill or a hammer mill, should weigh between 65 and 75% of the original bushel weight. So using the rolling index or the comparison of weights, if you had a 45-pound barley going into the roller based on a bushel weight measurement, they've got those nice little cups with the scales on them, or you've got the little canisters with the moisture testers on the farm. If it weighed 70 or 40, if it was 48 pounds to the bushel going into the roller, it should be roughly 36 pounds coming out. If your weights are too light and below 65%, that means that you're processing it too fine, and it's probably good for the pigs, but not good for the cows. If it's too heavy, you're not processing it enough, and you're not getting the digestive efficiency that you want. So peas generally don't need to be processed if it's less than 25% of the grain mix. And I'm using that as a guideline from comments I've received from different people, but you'll see grain in the manure. Put on a latex glove or a rubber glove and roll the kernel of grain between your finger and thumb. And sometimes you can be surprised that once you roll the hull off the carcass of the kernel, you can see that there's nothing inside. Same thing with the peas. Maybe there's nothing inside the hull. But if you do find something in the grain, in the peas, you need to roll it to get the higher digestive efficiency. And you only need to break it into two pieces. Crack the hull, that's all you have to do. So in that case, if your rollers are too tight, it's like like a set of ball bearings on the rollers, and they don't want to go through. Open up the rollers so that they're almost fully open, and it'll process the grain a lot faster. Now, when you're not processing the grain, you will lose between 12 and 15% efficiency with the barley. You'll get that less much energy and less amount of protein from that grain. 25% loss for wheat, 5 to 10% for oats. And I should have put corn on there, which will be roughly that 8 to 10%. Corn should always be cracked into 2 to 3 pieces as well. So when grain prices were low, some people would say, well, I can put up with not feeding my barley, putting my barley through the processor because it's going to cost me more to run the equipment and my time than it's what it's worth to feed that extra 15% grain. But right now with barley at $6 a bushel and you're getting a 15% loss, by not rolling, you're going to lose about 40 cents per bushel on feed efficiency. So if you can roll the grain for less than 40 cents a bushel, it's definitely economically viable to do that process. So how much processing is needed? Wheat, rye, triticale, crack it into only 2 pieces. Those types of grains digest faster than barley and wheat. So the more fines you have or the smaller the pieces are, the faster they're digested, and then that increases the amount of acid produced and gases produced, so you have a higher risk for acidosis and bloat. Barley, again, 2 to 3 pieces through a hammer mill. If it's being processed too fine, either slow the tractor RPMs down to roughly 1,300 RPM, or put an older set of hammers and screens back into the hammer mill. Rollers, 2 pieces. You'll often not recognize that the kernel's been broken, but you'll see a line across the hull. And again, put that kernel between your finger and thumb, roll it. If it breaks into 2 pieces, that's exactly what you're looking for. It's not a crime to see some grains coming through whole, because you're always going to have kernels that are a little bit thinner with a lower bushel weight compared to the fatter kernels. And I'd rather see some kernels coming through whole rather than getting too many fines in the final product. With barley being a hot commodity right now and very high priced, if you have an opportunity to buy some lightweight barley that's not wanted by the elevators or by the feedlots, you'll typically see a $5 a ton discount for every pound of bushel weight below 46 pounds. So work that was done at the University of Alberta, they found that feeding grain down to 42 pounds per bushel, there was no difference in average daily gain or feed conversion. And the nice thing about that is that extra 4 pounds below 46 could be a $20 a ton or 50 cents a bushel discount on the price of that grain. If you have to use barley that's less than 42 pounds, they found that you're going to have a 1% reduction in performance for every pound in bushel weight below 42. On the big side of things, or the high end with the extra heavy barley, there's no differences in performance, and they tested barley up to 54 pounds per bushel. Protein is one of the main, when I look at a ration and decide to balance the ration, the first 2 nutrients that I look for are protein and energy. You've got a number of different products that are providing protein, either in supplemental form as a byproduct or in peas, and there's always a certain amount of protein in hay, straw, green feed, and grains. But I'm looking at it as if your hay is only 7, 8, 9% protein, how do you supplement the extra protein that's needed by these animals? So what they do at the lab is they grind your hay samples and grain samples and then run them through an extraction process, and they find out how much nitrogen is in the sample, no different than a soil sample. They then multiply the percent nitrogen in the extract from the sample by 6.25 as a conversion factor to get the percent protein in your feed. Now, protein is essential for growth, lactation, and reproduction, along with maintaining animal health and just some of that energy protein, if necessary. If it's fed too high, it can be converted to energy as well. Now, different animals have different requirements depending on the stage of production. So a cow that's pregnant, mid-pregnancy, late pregnancy, or after calving, versus those for calves that are growing at different rates and at different weights, they also have different protein requirements. The big thing is when your feed is digested by the microbes in the rumen and digestive system, you can have 70, 80% of that nitrogen or that protein being used by the microbial population to keep themselves alive. Some of these microbes only have a lifespan of 20 minutes. So if you have a shortage of protein, they can't reproduce as efficiently and your digestion rate of the feeds drops. Therefore, your feed intake drops. So some of the products, the protein levels that we have in both grains and some of the byproducts that you can add to hay. So for example, barley grain is typically in that 12% range. Canola meal at 38, peas at 24. The big one right now is soybean meal at 54% protein, the highest source, but unfortunately it's the most expensive and it's not viable to use in a ration. So I know that everything is getting more expensive and there's the inability to buy some of these things because they're sold out, but you have to work out the costs based on where you are and the freight it will cost to get the product back to the farm. So there's on feed test results, you've got a crude protein number, and a lot of them will have an SP, which stands for soluble protein. That's the percentage of ingested protein that will be consumed by the bacteria in the rumen and the upper digestive system. So the main purpose of the soluble protein is to keep the microbes living and reproducing. The undegradable protein or bypass protein, which is the difference between the total protein and the soluble protein levels, is necessary for lean growth development in calves, milk proteins, and for the efficient growth of an animal. So you need to have a certain percentage of protein as the undegradable form to help these calves grow. Research in this is starting to pick up steam and be more definitive than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So people are paying more and more attention of getting that undegradable protein intake up to where it needs to be to support the growth. The other test that you have for protein is the ADICP, or acid detergent insoluble crude protein. If your bales were put up a little bit higher moisture content than they should have been, and they start to heat after the bales have been made, when protein levels or temperatures get above 35 degrees Celsius, some of the protein is bound to the fiber components. And when it does that, there's no way for the bacteria to get that protein into the form that the animals can use. So if you've got hay that smells sweet or smells like tobacco, has a dark brown color, that I would say is a situation where you've had the Maillard reaction, which causes the deterioration in quality and binding of protein to the fibers. So in that case, there's a second calculation they do on the test report is they've got an adjusted CP or adjusted crude protein, and they take the amount of protein that is bound to the fiber, subtract it from the crude protein level, and that is the amount that you should be using when you're building your rations, because that's what the animals can actually get. Macro and trace minerals. Feed test reports. Calcium. These numbers will be on the website if you want to look at the presentation later. It's being recorded and you can take a look at it later. But the big ones that I pay attention to, calcium at least 0.4. I like to see it in that 0.6 or higher. 0.2% for phosphorus is a requirement. 0.2% for magnesium. Sodium, the lower the better, because if you're getting a lot of sodium in the feed, they won't want to eat their salt-free choice. Sodium makes up 39% of the weight of salt. Potassium and iron, you have to live with what you get. There's not much you can do about that, and typically the amounts supplied are more than adequate. Manganese and copper and zinc are usually low. They only provide roughly 25 to 50% of what's required by the animal. So in a lot of cases, blue salt is not adequate to provide those trace minerals. I recommend a fortified trace mineral salt with selenium year-round. And the only time I'll recommend a blue salt or a white salt block is if you're using a complete mineral or a complete feed that's supposed to have everything in there that they need, and the animals are craving a little bit more salt, then I'd use that. But otherwise, use that fortified TM salt year-round. Differences in requirements. You can see that a 600-pound calf versus a cow in late pregnancy, they almost have the same amount of calcium requirement, but phosphorus, magnesium, copper, manganese, and zinc are much different. So you have to adjust the ration to meet the requirements of the animal. Selenium, it is very deficient in most areas of Western Canada. There's an area down by the Crow's Nest Pass and an area north of Willingdon that are high in selenium, but otherwise it's very deficient in most other areas. Expensive to test for, so we don't even test for selenium. We just add the amount that's required. Cobalt and iodine, they're non-existent in all the soils of Western Canada and Northern US. So you have to supply those at 100% of requirements year-round. Went over a little bit of this. Fortified trace mineral with blue is what you're recommended. Blue salt's not an option. If you're fighting with getting enough consumption, either in the wintertime or if they're not getting enough out of the blocks, use a loose formulation. Put it into some sort of feeder to protect it from the wind and the rain, but you'll get better consumption. Vitamins in hay start to oxidize when the hay is cut, and 60 to 90 days after it is cut, they start to oxidize and are not available to the animal. And if you're making silage, either the round bale silage, chopped or pit silage, those processes will destroy the vitamins, and everything has to be provided. Vitamin E supplementation. You calculate what's supplied on a daily basis, the concentration in the mineral multiplied by the expected intake in kilograms will give you how much they will consume or should be consuming. So for example, the late pregnancy cow, 300 IUs per day, lactating beef cow at 500, and then the feedlot animals, either 1,000 for the newly received calf or 300 for a feedlot calf or something that you'd be feeding right now. Now, injecting a vitamin A-D product only has enough E to prevent the oxidation of vitamin A and D. So very little benefit there. The vitamin E injections that you're giving will provide adequate amounts for probably 3 to 5 days. But the big thing is you're better to feed it out throughout the winter than injecting it at birth. And I'll get to that story in a couple minutes. So product evaluation, it's going to be a little bit hard for for participation by all the people on the call, but what I do is look at what type of product is being used and what are you getting from it. So protein lick tubs or blocks generally used in the late grazing season when the grass is over mature, and there's no way to supplement it with grain or hay, better quality hay. So a tub is better than nothing, but you're going to have extremely variable intakes. Some cows will take a whole bunch and some won't even go up to the tub. So when you see a tub disappear and you calculate, okay, they took about the right amount on average, you really don't know how much each animal is getting. And that's a concern because some will be over-consuming and some won't be getting enough. So this is a product that I found in my book of labels. Expected intake is 454 grams or a pound a day. Working backwards from the price of this product, it was $1.44 per day. And you can see protein levels are good at 22%, very low calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium, because those products are extremely hard to keep in suspension when they're pouring these tubs. And if it isn't consistent from the start to the finish, Ag Canada or the Canadian Food Inspection Agency will not grant them a registration so they can sell the product. So protein, it's only giving you 12% is what's required. Some of these other values are quite a bit higher, but again, you really need to know the quality of your forage to see if this is the right way to go. The other product that you can put into a grain mix, or they have in a 32% protein supplement or some of these tubs, is urea, and it supplies non-protein nitrogen. So it's halfway from getting the nitrogen from the feeds compared to what the bacteria want at the end of the day. The only thing there is you need 0.15% sulfur in the ration as the minimum so that you do get the 4 essential amino acids synthesized. And you also need 2 to 3 pounds of grain so that you can use that protein from the urea efficiently. One word of warning, don't exceed 25% of the total protein in the ration as NPN, and watch body condition. Chelates, proteinates complexes, they claim to have higher bioavailability and to improve reproduction, feed efficiency, and animal health. But the downside is they're 3 to 5 times higher cost than regular minerals, and usually they only have 20 to 30% in the chelated form or the complex form. If you're doing a good job with a regular inorganic mineral, you're not having problems with reproduction issues or sick animals, then your inorganics are good enough to feed and save a lot of money. So quickly, in your head, you've got 2 different minerals on the shelf and you're going to buy one. Which one do you take? You can see there's a difference in a calcium phosphorus ratio, and you've got different levels of trace mineral fortification. And to compound that, you also have different intakes. So how do you decide which one is better? The 2-to-1 mineral, or the 16-8, is typically used for cereal green feeds, grass hay, straw and grain, swath grazing, cereal silages, and also with corn grazing. In a lot of situations, the calcium levels are still deficient, and what you're looking at is going to a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 mineral, which is commonly sold as a swath grazing mineral or a corn grazing mineral, which will have someplace in the line of 20 to 24% calcium, maybe 3 or 4% phosphorus. The 1-to-1 mineral is good when you have a legume in the mix, or if you have to salvage a canola crop after a hailstorm or a frost, or in the new situations that we're looking at with the companion crops or cover crops being seeded as an annual in with the barley or other cereal crop, you might want the 1-to-1 mineral as well. So what you're getting out of this and it makes sense. Your calcium will always be twice as much as the phosphorus in the 2-to-1 product. In the 1-to-1 product, you should be getting the same. But you had a 3,000 milligrams per kg concentration of copper in the first product and only in the 2,000 in the second. But you can see, based on the concentration times the kilograms consumed per day, you're getting the same amount of each product. So you really have to calculate with pencil and paper to see which one you really need, or if you want to go ahead and use a program such as Cowbites, it'll give you the answer when you plug in all the numbers. Fibers and energies. This is what we need. The calculations for energy are based on the fibers, and acid detergent fiber is an indication of maturity of the forage. For every week that you let that stand mature and try to get a little bit more feed out of the field, you're going to lose roughly 1 to 1.5% protein, and your fiber levels are going to go up by 2% per week. So acid detergent fiber is used for estimating energy content, and the neutral detergent fiber, cellulose, lignin, silica, hemicellulose, and that's basically the entire cell wall and the interior. That one is used to estimate how much dry matter intake an animal can consume, and that's limited to 1.2% of body weight. So on a feed test report on a grass hay, you typically see a 35, 36, 37% ADF. And that's maybe a little bit higher than what I like to see, but that's reasonable. When your NDF values are typically 15 points higher than the acid detergent fiber, in this case, they're a little bit more. And once you get above 60% neutral detergent fiber or NDF, you do go ahead and get a reduction in feed intake on overall. So the energy contents are based on the acid detergent fiber and the calculations done to produce a TDN. You've also got the net energy system to give you an energy value. And the other one that's not on the chart is digestible energy. I typically stick with the TDN and digestible energy just because there's only one number to work with. Now, calculated values. The non-fibrous carbohydrates, which are listed on some of the feed test reports, include the sugars, starches, galactans, and pectins, and that's typically used for dairy rations. TDN and digestible energy, like I mentioned before, is from acid detergent fiber, and you must watch the equations because different labs use different formulas, and they can be out by 3 to 5 points. So instead of 53, they could be reporting a 58 or vice versa. And that makes a huge difference on what you need to supplement with. Net energy systems, or the net energy system basically breaks down the components into 3 groups: maintenance, gain, and lactation. Just think of it as 3 rain barrels sitting in a row. You have to fill the first one up before extra energy goes into the second one and then into the third one. So it's a cascading effect. And if you don't meet the energy requirements, they're not going to gain anything. And the last thing to get energy is the lactation. So it's a more complex system, but in some ways, it's a better way to go for researchers and if you really want to get particular on what you're doing. So the one question that I see once in a while is, gee, how do I tell if my animal is finished? By the time you get into the ring, it's too late. So what you do at home, you can even do this right now, is you can put your hands on the animal. Body condition scoring is a subjective method because you use your fingers and your eyes. And what you're trying to do is measure the amount of tissue and fat that are standing out over the 4 short ribs that are in the loin area. And basically what you're doing is you're measuring the sharpness of the bone across from one to the other, and also the indentation between them, and also the sharpness of the bone from top to bottom. Now, you always work on the right-hand side of the animal when you're looking from it from behind. And the reason for that is the left side is where the rumen is sitting, and that will give you a false indication of how much tissue is over the short ribs. You also use pin bones and the spine just as a visual to confirm what your fingers are seeing on the short ribs. So it's an evaluation tool. You want to have the animals in a body condition score of 3 for cows and bulls to get them through the winter and the start of the calving season. So what you would feel on a body condition score of 3 is the bones are not sharp. You will feel a little bit of an indentation between the different short ribs, but there's always some cover over that bone. It's not sharp to the finger. Now, when you're looking for a finished animal, they need to have more fat on their carcass compared to a cow. And what you're feeling then is you will feel no indentations between the short ribs. You'll have to push fairly hard to actually feel the bone. And that's an indication that you've got enough finish on that animal. So if you're 30, 40, 50 days ahead of the show and sale, then you need to add a little bit more grain or add a little bit of oil to the ration to increase their energy density. If you're feeding a replacement heifer or a cow-calf project, you want to keep them at the body condition score 3, because if the heifers are growing too fast and they have too much fat deposited, it's going to negatively impact their milk production capability throughout their entire life. So, in conclusion, there's many different components that have to be considered when you're trying to raise an animal. One does not work independent from another. They're all linked. And if you change one thing, you're going to get a change in something else. And in the previous presentations, I've always said, small changes, small problems, big changes, big problems. Use a balanced approach when you're making decisions, and only change one thing at a time so that you figure out what is causing the problem or how you're solving the problem that exists. Look on the internet, look at some of the manuals that you have from 4-H or some of the other stuff that they have online to see if you can find some answers for the problems that you have. And if nothing else, talk to people in the industry. Talk to your parents, talk to the veterinarian, and see what information they can provide you if you're not sure what's going on. With that, Tracy, any questions from the crowd?
Barry, we did have one question earlier about ringworm too. Just how do, what was it? How do, ideas on treating the ringworm?
The only answer to that one is time. Ringworm is a virus, no different than chickenpox. There's nothing you can do to treat it. Some guys have tried putting toothpaste on it to cut off the air supply, but basically nothing really does anything. You just have to let the disease go through its course, and once they've had it once, they do not get it a second time. It's ugly and it's troublesome, but unfortunately there's nothing you can do.
Right. Next question was, what are your thoughts on the Rio Max tubs? Are they worth the money?
I did another webinar on this about a week ago with a group of producers. And the Rio Max tubs are, and this is from the producer that checked for prices. I didn't do the work on this, but he said those tubs are 5 times more expensive than the typical tub. So with that variability of intake, not knowing how much each cow is getting, I would say you're better off in 95% of the situations to go with a different product. Tubs are not my favorite just because of the cost, but they do have their places. Instead of spending that $1 a day for trace minerals and vitamins, with a good dry mineral vitamin salt product, you can probably get that cost down to any place from 10 to 15, 18 cents a day. So it is a big expense.
Okay, next comment. We saw active lice on my heifer 2 weeks ago, so we traded with the Normectin as that's what we had. And we didn't know of Boss. Should we retreat with Boss now?
After the 2 weeks, those lice should be dead. Before retreating that animal, take a cup of mineral oil or canola oil, put the animal in the squeeze, pour that cup of mineral oil along the backbone and let it soak into the hair. Let the animal out of the squeeze and watch it for about 20 minutes. What happens is the lice live right beside the hide on the short hair that provides the insulation. And they breathe air. So when that oil gets down to that layer on the short hairs and on the hide, what those lice will do is they'll start scratching and they want to climb up the hairs, but they're so slippery they can't get any traction. And that activity of the lice drives the calf absolutely crazy. And what you'll see is that animal will try to scratch on almost anything that's available. It might, be overly active and jumping to, try to get that uncomfortable feeling off of them. So if you see that activity going on, yes, you're going to have to be treating them again. But if they walk away and there's no activity and they seem to be fine, then you did a good job and the product killed the lice. So 50-50 chance on that one, and just try it with the canola oil first or the mineral oil first to see if you really need to treat or not.
Okay. Second question. My 2 steers, when it warms up, seem to eat more hay and less grain for a day or two. What should I do to stop this? There is a few questions like that, Barry, where it's talking about the warmer weather and how to keep my cattle from backing off on their feed. So
great questions. I'm glad I heard this one because I missed it altogether. When animals enter into a cold weather cycle, in order to keep warm, they increase the amount of feed that they're able to consume. And that's just Mother Nature's way of protecting them. And typically, when feed is being digested, there's always heat produced during that fermentation. So when the weather starts to warm up and you're still giving them the same amount of feed, and maybe you've increased the grain a little bit to help keep them warm, what happens is they're eating the same amount as it starts to warm up. They get hot, and it's funny to think at -30 or -20 you can have a heat-stressed calf, but what they're doing is they're producing too much heat, and in order to get comfortable again, they back off on their feed intake. So over 3-4 days after the weather has changed and warmed up, you'll see that your total feed intake has reduced, but it shouldn't be more than a couple, 3 pounds less than the coldest period of time. If you want to help them get back onto feed, reduce the grain being fed by 1 to 2 pounds. That way they don't produce as much heat and they feel more comfortable. When we get cold, we put on a sweater. When we get hot, take it off. They've got a fur coat that they can't do anything about, and the only way they can make themselves comfortable is by reducing the amount of feed that they eat.
okay. Next question. If your steer weighed 950 pounds at weigh-in, how do I make him not look so soggy or like unfinished?
I guess the question back to the member is, what is the weight of that calf right now?
Okay, we'll see if he answers that. Can Bovetec be added to the mineral that's being fed free choice if the cows are on an oat green feed ration to make better use of the feed and also for cocci prevention?
Yes, absolutely. That is why Bovetec was designed the way it was, so that you can put it out free choice. Overconsumption of Bovetec is not harmful to the animal.
Okay, and then along these two, can you feed free choice Bovetec to cows prior to calving to minimize shedding of the protozo for coccidiosis?
Yes. Recommendations on the label are defeated at a minimum of 21 days prior to calving, but I like to see that done 30 days prior to calving, because you're always going to get one or two that are, up to a week early. And you want to have that protection so that the cows aren't shedding the eggs. So that newborn calf, if it finds a little puddle of water or wants to lick the ground, it's not consuming the egg.
Okay, so the young fella that asked about his big steer, he says right now he weighs 1,300 pounds.
So that's 350 pounds in roughly 100 days. So that animal is gaining well. The only thing that I would suggest to try to, get rid of some of that fat or to improve the muscling of that animal is increase the protein content in that ration. So if you can keep that ration at roughly 12% protein, a lot more of that energy will be used to produce meat or lean tissue and bone. The bone is almost fully developed at 1,300 pounds, but by increasing that protein, more muscle will be developed on the ribeye and other parts of the body, and less energy will go to the fat. So that should get rid of that wiggle and jiggle, or at least reduce it as that animal continues to grow.
Okay, next question. What BCS should a calf be 60 days out from finish?
You want that animal to be in a body condition score. In order to finish properly and have muscling or marbling in the meat, you need to be on that high grain finishing ration for between 100 and 120 days.
Okay, so when the steers decrease their grain consumption because of heat, is it okay they are eating more hay in lieu of, or should we taper back how much hay we give them too?
Let them consume the hay free choice. Watch the manure of that animal. If the animal's coming up and eating the grain and consuming it well, the manure looks normal, it's not watery and sloppy, increase the grain component of that ration by 1 pound every 2 days until you're back up to where you were before the cold weather stopped. The big thing is, if you increase the grain too fast, you're going to get a high amount of acid and gases produced during the fermentation process. That's when you'll see either subclinical acidosis or bloat. And the first symptom of the subclinical acidosis is the manure becomes very watery and liquidy. So as long as the manure is looking good, every couple of days increase the grain, you should be back to normal probably within a week to 10 days. As your grain consumption goes up, the animals do like the taste of grain. they'll automatically reduce the amount of hay that they're consuming.
Okay. Here, my calf started at 672 pounds at weigh-in, and we are only at 960 pounds. Usually end at achievement day at 1,400 pounds, but my calf never looks finished.
If they can, is this a Simmental or a Charolais cross or a Charolais Simmental cross? If the member can answer that, while she's doing that, gaining 300 pounds in, let's say, 100 days, they're still gaining 3 pounds a day, which is not bad, but the amount of grain that's going to be fed to this calf needs to be increased. I would suggest that your upper limit will be someplace around 20, 22 pounds a day. Once you get above 10 pounds of grain in the ration, feed half of it in the morning, half at night. And if you're still concerned that you're not getting enough finish on that steer, add a cup of canola oil to the grain mixture. Canola oil has 10 or 2.5 times more energy per pound compared to barley. So that'll improve their growth rate. It will also, with the linoleic acid in the canola oil, it will soften the hair, make it nice and shiny, so that when you're grooming and having the judge looking at it for the grooming competition, that animal will look better than some, the shine of the coat may attract his eye and get you a better placing in the ring.
She says her calf is a Maine Anjou, Barry.
Okay, Maine Anjous are again one of those really big animals with a 1,800 pound cow size in some situations. The other thing, if I remember correctly, Maines are an animal that is a double muscled animal. In other words, the muscles, you look at an Angus or a Hereford, everything looks smooth, whereas the Maines, they will have muscles stacked on top of muscles like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So it is difficult to get them to finish. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised that 20 pounds to 22 pounds of grain is definitely going to be needed now until show. And in this situation, I'd be looking at feeding the Bovetec or Romancin to improve the digestive efficiency as well. Add the extra canola oil if you feel comfortable doing that.
She said they're already feeding straight barley at 12.6 pounds morning and night. So
she's right there. That's that animal's burning on 90 to 95% grain in the ration. You need that 5 to 10% forage so that the rumen continues to function properly. I'm afraid you're doing everything right, and the only other suggestion I have is either add the ionophore if you're not using it already, and start adding that cup of canola oil a day to the ration. That's about all you can do.
okay, somebody asked, what is the reason if their manure is gray?
My question back, are you feeding diatomaceous earth?
Okay, we'll just wait for the answer. What if my calf in the summer takes more time to shed its winter hair?
That's just a biological process that is dependent upon temperature, wind, the nutritional status of the animal. If you do want to increase the shedding rate, some people have said just make sure you're feeding that fortified trace mineral salt with selenium. But in a lot of cases, it's partially genetic, and there's not much you can do to change that process.
Sorry,
now,
Yuri.
if I may, with those animals, before they actually start shedding, if it's an Angus, either a red or a black Angus, or animals with a black or a red hair coat. If you place that animal between the sun and yourself and you look along the flank of the animal, if the tips of the hair are not black right to the end or not red right to the end and they look more like a carrot or have the orangey color, that's an indication to me that your copper status of that animal is not up to par. They're missing, they need more copper in their diet. And if you're typically short of copper, you're usually short of the other trace minerals as well. And that could play a part in that shedding process as well.
Okay. So back to the question about the gray manure, they said no. So I'm assuming they're not feeding diatomaceous earth.
Okay. The only thing that may cause that to happen is animals eating dirt on their own, just picking it off the ground. That will that will change the color of the manure, but that's one where you pretty well have to go out and take a look and see what's going on. I really don't know of any good reason other than them eating dirt for that to happen. Does not mean that their digestive system is upset or if they're having a problem. There's got to be another reason for that manure to be that color.
Quite a few questions now about the canola oil. They want you to elaborate a little bit more. We've had questions about how long before the show do you suggest canola oil for the hair? Yeah, that's about it for the canola oil one.
Okay. Now, don't go running into your mom's kitchen and taking the jug of canola oil from under the sink or wherever she hides it and using that to feed the calves, because that'll get very, very expensive in a short period of time. You can go to feed mills or farm supply stores and you can buy a 20-liter pail of industrial grade canola oil or feed grade canola oil for about the same price as a 5-liter jug of canola oil in the grocery store. If you think that your animals are not going to finish properly, don't be scared to start feeding that extra canola oil from now to sale day. So we're about 60 to 90 days away. That will improve your average daily gain by roughly a quarter pound per day. The other thing is it'll take about 2 months for that linoleic acid to work its way into the hair, soften the hair coat, and make it shiny. So anytime now you can start adding the canola oil. And I'd suggest mixing it into the grain with a hockey stick or some other implement so that it's not just sitting in one area. And if you can, put half in the morning, half at night. The other thing that you may want to do if you're starting to see the manure getting a little bit loose is add a half cup of limestone in the morning and a half cup of limestone at night to the grain mix as well. That's just going to add more calcium to the diet. And so limestone is calcium carbonate. The carbonate form will act as a buffer and keep the rumen pH higher than it would without the calcium there. And that could potentially prevent that subclinical acidosis and make the manure return back to normal.
Okay. They're asking, where can we get the Bovetec?
You can get that at any feed mill. Most feed companies or stores that handle feeds do have a supplement that contains Bovetec. You cannot buy the bag of Bovetec in pure form. They will not sell that to you because they're only eating 2, 3, 4 grams a day. And to measure that out accurately and prevent a problem from happening, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency says it'll only be sold in the mixed form in either a supplement or in a grain mix.
Okay. Somebody had asked about Bovetec. Is it harmful to horses the way Romancin is?
All three of them, selenium, Bovetec, and Romancin, will kill horses. It will kill dogs. It'll kill turkeys and poultry, and it'll also kill donkeys.
The couple of them have asked at what rate would you feed the canola oil?
Half a cup per day is
Okay.
all you need. And you don't want to go higher than that, because when you have too much fat or too much oil in the ration, the rumen contents don't turn properly. The feed in the rumen doesn't turn properly. It's like a tire spinning on ice. And if that happens, your digestion rate goes down, feed intake goes down, bloats increase dramatically. So, you know, some people may be thinking, well, if half a cup is good, I'm going to go to a cup and a half and get that much better at what I want. You're actually going to do more harm. So stick with that half a cup per day. That's your upper limit.
Half a cup per animal, right?
Half a cup per animal per day. And
Yeah.
for the first 2 or 3 days, you don't want to just throw half a cup in there. Start off with, you know, a quarter cup or a smaller amount, about a third or a sixth of a cup. Feed that for 2 or 3 days, then switch up to, you know, a quarter cup, then go up to a half a cup. So it might take you a week to get up to that full half a cup per day for the animals. That way it's not a big change in their digestive system and what they're being fed.
Right. So I think you mentioned just about every animal, but will it kill sheep too, Barry?
No, actually, Romancin, all three of those products are recommended for sheep for feed efficiency or prevention of cocci.
There you go.
Read the label to make sure that it is registered for sheep. I have to look at the compendium to be sure, but I know that they're used in, you know, the selenium is the one that I don't think is registered, but Bovetec and Romancin are definitely registered for sheep.
There you go. This question, I've heard of some people using old deep fryer oil. Once it is heated, how does that change the energy? Does it become harmful to the animals?
No, the used oil is perfectly fine. It does have a different color because usually what happens is there's some flour or other component in there that fries and actually burns. That's what gives you the darker color, but the energy content and digestibility does not change at all.
Question, could we add peas to a ration of rolled barley and silage to increase protein at this point in the year?
Absolutely, yes. Your protein requirements by this time of year are a little bit less than when they were 600 or 700 pounds. But if you do feed that extra protein, it could increase the amount that those animals will eat. Again, you can either roll the peas or feed them whole, but check in the manure. Put the rubber glove on or the nitrile glove on and see if those peas are actually empty. So squash it when you find that pea in the manure or the pea casing. If it is completely empty, keep on going. If it's, you know, if it's got undigested grain inside, then you're going to have to roll the peas.
Okay, you mentioned sheep. I'm assuming goats can probably have it then too, Barry?
Oh, I'd have to look on the labels for that one. I don't know if there's a registration for it or not.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do right now is, for the person that's asking the goat question, just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to get my mouse to work in the right place. I don't want this to be a commercial, but who asked that question, send me an email tomorrow, and I'll look at the compendium and find out what the answer is, and I'll get back to you. And I'll also get back to Tracy so she can distribute the answer to everybody.
Okay, and then just to clarify, on the canola oil again, it's just a half a cup per day, right? So like a quarter in the morning, a quarter in the afternoon?
That is correct.
Right.
Now, the other thing that tends to help with feed efficiency and growth rates is you want to keep that grain portion going to those animals in 12-hour increments. So if you're feeding at 8 o'clock in the morning, you should feed the second half of that grain at 8 o'clock at night. That just spreads out the energy availability and improves gain a little bit. It's not much, but it tends to help. So if you're stuck at well, this year hasn't been so bad, but if you're stuck at a hockey game or a volleyball tournament, get somebody else to feed for you. So you're not going 8 o'clock in the morning and then 10 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock at night. You need to keep that consistent.
Does anybody have any other questions? I think we've pretty much cleaned up the chat, Barry.
Okay, that's great.
So that's all that seems to be coming up in there. So if there's no other questions.
Okay, that sounds good. A lot of great questions tonight, covering some of the stuff that I didn't put into the presentation, and then just to confirm what was there. So that was great. I appreciate that. That means people were listening and really wanting to figure out what to do. So if you get any questions later, Tracy, and they're scared to text me or send me an email, if you get some, don't feel afraid to send them to me.
Yeah, we just had one question here before you jump off. What are your thoughts on wheat mill run pellets?
Wheat mill run pellets are roughly 22% protein, 84% TDN, so they're a high quality feed. They have a higher fat content than the other grains, which is not a problem. But wheat is a feed that digests faster than barley and corn and oats. So your feeding limit to 1,000 or 1,200 pound animal would be someplace in that 5 to 6 pounds a day range. Wouldn't go higher than that, but excellent feed. Animals do very well on it. And again, if you're introducing it as something new in the ration, start off with a couple pounds, and then again, 1 pound increase every second day. And so when you're putting the wheat pellets in, if you're adding 1 pound of wheat, take out 1 pound of barley so that you're not double dosing them with the total amount of grain. And then once you get up to the total amount, that's 6 pounds of wheat mids, then you can continue to increase the barley content in that ration.
Okay, that's all we have for questions again.
All right, no problem. Thank you for the opportunity. And like I said, if you got questions, don't be afraid to let Tracy know or give me an email or a text, and we'll see if we can get your questions answered.
Thanks, Barry.
Well, thank you, Barry. Go ahead, Tracy.
No, that's all. Yep, you're good.
Thanks, Barry, for doing this, taking the time to do this for our members and everything. Like you said there with the questions and everything, they were obviously very interested, and a lot of good questions came out of this presentation here and whatnot tonight. So again, thank you for taking the time, and yeah, this will be on the 4-H website if anybody wants to watch this later, probably in about a week or so. You can go onto the YouTube channel there and everything like that. Or if somebody missed it or whatever, you can pass it on to that, onto them. Barry's information will be up there as well if you want to contact him, and go from there. Thank you for everybody for joining us here tonight, and good night.